DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Hi guys, it's Alex. If you are a fan of sled dog sports in the Iditarod, Mushing Radio is the show for you. Each Wednesday we drop a new episode on DogWorks Radio, so be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on DogWorks Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog, available on DogWorks Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. You are listening to our 2018 Iditarod coverage here on Mushing Radio. You can find us over on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find us over on social media. Just search for DogWorks Radio. And joining me today is my co-host. His name is Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going really good, Robert. It's been a very interesting Iditarod. And Michelle and I were talking last night, and it was very much looking like it was Nick Pettit's race to lose. He had just gotten to Unalakleet, and, there is an old, I think it's Japanese curse, may you live in interesting times. And today was certainly an interesting day for Nick Pettit, which we'll get into in a moment. But right now, looking at the standings, we have the top three, who've pretty much been the top three for more than a few days. You're also Nick Pettit and Mitch Seavey, only now instead of Nick being a couple of hours ahead, he got into Koyuk about an hour and 9 minutes behind your. So he lost the lead. Mitch Seavey is another couple hours behind Nick, so still solidly in third. And then we've got a huge chase pack coming up behind them. Pete Kaiser, Travis Beal, Wade Mars, Ramey Smith, Linwood Fielder, Richie Deal, Matt Hall, Aaron Burmeister, Matt Thaler, Ali Zirkle, and Jesse Royer. So it's become a very interesting race. At the back of the pack, we have Tom Schoenberger is in Grayling, and Steve Watkins and Tara Ciccatello, who are, I believe, traveling together or traveling very close to each other, are out of Grayling on the way up to the next checkpoint of Caltag. We also had one scratch today. Ryan Reddington scratched in Caltag. I don't have a lot of information on that. Basically just the standard he scratched for the well-being of his dogs. I imagine we'll find out a little bit more about that sometime in the next day or two. But that is where we are right now. And, the ice on Galvin Bay is considered a really treacherous part of Iditarod. It's hard sometimes the ice shifts. It's hard sometimes to tell where the trail is. There are overflow issues at times. There are issues with the ice moving, going either towards the shore or going out towards the sea. And so longtime listeners may recall that Hugh Neff got into trouble a couple years ago and was stuck out on the ice for many, many hours. And going back to the earliest modern Iditarods, it's not been unusual for teams to go across the ice to try to beat storms, and that's been a real factor as well. And also going back to the 1925 Serum Run, that it was considered the most hazardous part of the trail. among many other hazardous parts of the trail. So what seems to have happened today, this afternoon, Nick Pettit was several hours in front of Yor and Mitch. Yor especially was whittling down on that lead, and then Nick seems to have taken a wrong turn or lost the trail while he was on the ice. So rather than going straight north up towards Koyuk, he wound up going more to the east, reached land at the edge of the ice, went a little bit farther, then seemed to realize that he was not on the trail anymore and had to turn his team around, go back and refine the trail. So he lost probably about 10 or 11 miles and more than an hour in doing so. And as a result of that, and you're just going a lot faster in the last day or so, we now have a new leader, and Yor Olsum is got into Koyuk an hour before Nick. So that is a pretty dramatic turnabout from where we were this time yesterday.
You know, first off, Alex, I want to thank you and Michelle for covering for me when I was out on the trail with our students from UAA. I really appreciate that, and we'll make sure that these other episodes that you guys recorded are on our feed. I know a lot of people have been asking about it over on my Facebook page, so I will get those loaded up as soon as possible. But secondly, Alex, I know that this sort of veer-off has happened before. Several years ago, somebody went out on the ice and they thought that they were out on an iceberg, so to speak, and and the tracker was just going kind of wild. And this really freaks out the fans, doesn't it, when they go out on that sea ice, especially people that are constantly hitting that refresh button. It can turn into quite an amazing day for the race fans, can't it?
It really can, and I think it's worse when the mushers are out there in the dark. The visibility when you're out on the ice apparently is very, very difficult, even in the best conditions, and it's hard to tell exactly where the trail is. A lot of times it's difficult. You're far enough away from the land that you don't really have anything to serve as sort of a way of orienting yourself and trying to figure out which way you're supposed to go. So it's a very tricky thing. I vaguely recall, I think it was in perhaps 2008 or 2009, that Lance Mackey also, I believe, took a similar kind of wrong turn, ended up losing several hours, but was so far ahead that he still went on to win. So this is definitely something that is not that unusual and has happened before. It's always a little bit scary when it happens because, you know, the trail is marked every, I think it's supposed to be marked every 25 or 50 yards or so, but a lot of times the trail markers will blow away, and sometimes it's not clear until you've been off the trail for a little while that you're off the trail at all.
Right. And just a little bit of a musher's perspective, throughout the race, they have a couple of different types of trail markers. They have the old school sort of tripod trail markers. It's three large logs that are out on several sections of the trail that they use. But now more commonly, it's just a piece of it kind of looks like a garden stake, and it'll have a orange top on it, and typically a piece of reflector tape, and typically it'll say Iditarod. And you're right; those things do get knocked down. They do get run over by snow machines and the like, so they aren't nearly as reliable as those very large tripod type things. But what's also interesting, at least from a musher's perspective, I'm not sure exactly how it is out on the sea ice. On the river in particular, you know, whether it be the Sioux River here in the Mat-Su or the Yukon River up north in that second third of the river, typically the dogs will scent out a trail and they will try to find it whatever way possible. So if many dog teams have ran over that same trail, it may not even been in the last few days. It could be several weeks ago, those your dog team will often scent out that trail where a lot of teams have traveled, and I've been, I don't know how many times, Alex, kind of crisscrossing the river trying to find that right trail with my leaders, with their almost to like a bloodhound, their nose sort of to the ground, and they're just kind of weaving back and forth until they find that trail that they like, and then when they do, they will run their race on that trail. So I would imagine for somebody like Nick out there, who's a very experienced musher, I'm sure he was just sort of letting the dogs do their thing, even if he could not see those trail markers. He was allowing the dogs to sort of find their trail and, sort of run their race. But that's interesting to go 10 or 12 miles or so without seeing a trail marker or anything, and then realizing all of a sudden that you're not on the trail and you got to turn around and backtrack. What an amazing change of events. And, we've talked about your Olsum for the last several years as sort of the next up-and-coming musher, the one that's going to really break that bubble and do really well. So I don't think it could go to a better person if he ends up winning. He's been, kissing the heels of the top guys for the last several years, hasn't he?
He really has, and it's several people have pointed out that it is somewhat ironic that who is originally from Norway, is leading in Iditarod, and over in Norway at the Thin Market Slope race, Dallas Stevie, an American, is now in the lead there. Right.
Yeah, what an interesting year that we're having in long distance mushing for sure. So do you have any other stories of note? I'm kind of out of the loop, as I mentioned earlier, about what's happening in the last couple of days. Anything interesting happened that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out to people, as most people following the race or following our show know, Didi Genro scratched rather early in the race, very, very early in the race, was not feeling well herself, so she scratched, but she had really planned on this last Iditarod of hers being kind of a farewell tour for her to go and visit all of the villages and see the people that she has made friends with and has seen every year or every other year. Shortly after she scratched, there was a group of people in Unalakleet who arranged to have Didi flown out to Unalakleet, and they had a big banquet in her honor, a big potluck, and someone made a giant sheet cake that had a picture of Didi in her sort of iconic pink parka with a dog team. And so Didi was actually there to greet Nick and and Mitch when they came in, even though she scratched from the race. And although I'm not positive this would happen, I would not be at all surprised to see her up in Nome when the finishers start coming in as well.
Right. It's close community that we have, and everybody is a huge fan of Didi, and I think that she's pretty good friends with Mitch Seavey as well. I know that they've done a little bit of work together with tour groups and that sort of thing, and of course they always do speaking engagements and things when they're doing meet and greets and that sort of thing. So I think it's a cool way to sort of take that farewell tour. I would imagine it's very bittersweet for Didi. I'm sure she would love to keep going. But as she said, she wants to make time for her family. She wants to spend more time with her husband. And, even though the bug catches you in mushing, there has to be a time where you hang up the harnesses for that last time, at least in terms of racing. I'm sure she will continue with her dogs and just doing, whether she's doing, short races here in the community or taking on a different role. I don't think we've heard the last of Miss Genro, have we?
I sincerely hope not. She's a great person, a very warm and friendly and open person, and really just a fantastic ambassador for the sport. And she has always described Iditarod and sled dog racing as being a gigantic extended family. And I think that she is really someone who doesn't just use those words, but but it really is a big family for her. And it, even though she's not actually still competing and doesn't have her dogs in harness right now, I'm very happy that at least, in the last third of the race, that people are able to come out and tell her what she and what her career has meant to them as well.
Right. Anything else happening out there, or do we want to jump on over to our Musher Pro evening?
Let's jump over to our Musher profile. So today we're talking about Shani Traska, who is a rookie this year. She's doing very well. She's very solidly in the middle of the race. I believe she is currently around 45th, 50th, 49th place. She's originally from Michigan, and when she was 6 or 7 years old, her great aunt Dorothy came to visit her with an Alaskan Malamute that they had, who was named Snow Devil's Kodiak. And this Malamute had been trained in harness, so he was used to pulling either children's wagons, or in the wintertime he would pull either a kid's sled or those circular things that kids slide down hills on. So Shani wanted to have a chance to ride behind him, so she got on one of these saucers and grabbed the rope, and then spent all afternoon being pulled around by this Alaskan Malamute. And it was a couple years after that her same great aunt and uncle returned from a trip to Alaska, where they had met Joe Reddington Sr., one of the founders of the Iditarod, and they ran into him. They got invited to his house. They visited his kennels. At the time, he had 250 dogs in his kennel, and they were able to go out among the dogs, have their pictures taken, and look at the sleds and hear some of Joe Reddington's stories from the old days. And they came back to Michigan and just regaled Shani with the stories of what they'd heard from Joe Reddington. And she said that was really when she completely got hooked on the idea of being a musher. And so she was constantly, for the next few years, bothering her parents that she wanted to start her own kennel. She wanted to get dogs, and they kept telling her, well, you can get them when you're a little bit older. And I think they secretly thought that maybe this would be something that she would outgrow and she'd move on to something else, but she didn't. So pretty much from the time she was 9 years old, almost 20 years ago, she had this idea that she wanted to have her own dog team and she wanted to run the Iditarod. So she was begging and begging her parents to get her dogs. And a few years after that, they took her to watch the UP 200 race, which is runs from Marquette to Grand Marais in Michigan, so she could, look at sled dogs up close. And they kept telling her that it's really a lot of work to have dogs, and she would have to be totally responsible for them. But she kept saying year after year after year that she wanted to get dogs and start her own kennel. And a few years after that, her parents heard about a couple who lived nearby and competed in sprint races, named Lori and Ken Chizak. And so they went to visit the Chizaks, and they started training. Shani started training with them and learning about dogs and learning how to take care of dogs and how to mush. Got on back of a real sled for the first time, and they used to take her out every winter and in some of their fall conditioning and training runs. And then when she was about 14, her parents finally relented. They got her a few dogs, and before long she was running races with 6-dog teams, sometimes borrowing some teams from other people to fill out her teams. And then she started getting more and more dogs, and then that is where she started her own kennel, which is called Howling Ridge Kennel. And for a long time, it was just a very casual kind of recreational kennel. And she wanted to do more and more. As soon as she got her driver's license, she would go up with her dogs and train on state parklands where there were trails and where she could run. She started breeding dogs, got her first litter, and eventually, about 6 years ago, decided that she was going to move up to Alaska. At one point, she had almost 40 dogs, and she moved up to Alaska with 25 dogs in a truck. She had a job running glacier tours out of Juneau. Didn't really know anybody, but just kind of moved up there on her own. And her parents were a little bit uncertain, but they wanted to support her, so they said, okay, if you really want to go, then you can go. So she went up to Juneau. Her dad drove about a third of the way with her, and then she met some mushers who were also going up there, and went to Juneau, started living in various places, in Juneau at the glacier during the summers, and then up by Fairbanks and sometimes in Willow during the winters. Didn't really have any fixed place that she was for a long time. And then in 2015, she started getting serious and running her Iditarod qualifiers, starting with the Copper Basin 300. She ran the Yukon Quest 300 in 2016, and last year she ran the Two Rivers 200 and the Northern Lights 300 to qualify for Iditarod. And along the way, she married another musher that she met from Idaho named Burmy Traska, and now they are raising their dogs together. It's very interesting because her hometown newspaper said, and I'm sure this is a case of someone writing the article who didn't actually understand the sport, saying that Shani was hoping to be the first woman, the first rookie since 1975 to win the Iditarod. And I've seen interviews with her that she's done for ADN and KTUU and other places where she has said that her real goal is just to finish the race and to make sure that her dogs have a good time. This is her first long-distance race. She's done a bunch of mid-distance races, but this is her first 1,000-miler. So she's looking to give her dogs a very, very good experience. She says that 14 of the 16 dogs that she took for Iditarod were dogs that she raised from the very first day that they were born, and then had a couple of dogs that I believe she borrowed to fill out her team. As I mentioned, she's in 49th place right now, and I've seen a couple of interviews with her out on the trail, and she seems to be having just a wonderful time. She's always smiling and talks about how this is really a dream come true, and especially since it's something that she's been focused on for the last 20 years. It's just wonderful to see someone who, it's great to see anyone who's a rookie who runs Iditarod, but especially people who start their own kennels and raise their own dogs as opposed to coming up working as a handler or leasing a team. It's just, it makes me feel very, very hopeful for the future of Iditarod, knowing that there are so many rookies who are doing this.
Thanks for sharing, Alex. What I found most interesting is something you said a while back when you were talking about our musher tonight, is you said that she has raised 14 of the 16 dogs on her own. And I know that Danny Seavey wrote an article over on Facebook earlier this week where he talked about one of the problems that mushers are encountering these days, in particular if they have to scratch or if they're having problems on the trail, it's when they're mixing dogs from other teams, whether they're leasing them or borrowing them or whatever. They are not raising or running their own dogs. They may have a mixture of their own and a mixture of others, and that's where things are occurring. Did you get a chance to read that article when he published it a few days ago?
I did, and there was a lot of great stuff in that article. Not just that, but just a lot of great stuff. And it kind of keys into what you and I have talked about on a number of occasions, which is that there's a real bond that mushers have with dogs that they've raised either from the moment they were born or from when they were very young. And it's it's a two-way kind of trust, because the mushers know that if something goes wrong, the dog will know what to do. And the dogs also know the ability of the musher, and they know that, the musher can push a little bit harder, or they know when a musher is at his or her limit and really needs to stop. So it's a very complicated and nuanced type of communication, but I definitely agree that when you have a dog that you have known all of their life, that you are bound to get a much better performance and really much more trust. And we've seen people like Hugh Neff and Lance Mackey always talk about the incredible bond and relationship that they have with their dogs, especially with their leaders. And I think that this is clearly, Shaney is someone who appreciates this as well.
Right. Yeah. You can't go wrong from raising them from puppies and continuing on with running those guys throughout their lives. And there's nothing wrong, of course, with getting dogs from other kennels. We have a lot of dogs in our kennels that we've had for many years that we run with our teams, whether we're running in races competitively or just with expeditions with students and whatnot. But just having that a long time bond with them helps out a heck of a lot as well. Alex, we have about a minute and a half left. Is there anything else you want to talk about today before we close our daily coverage for the 12th of March?
Well, just want to mention that although the top three have shifted quite a lot, we have a big chase pack behind them, and even though they are getting towards White Mountain and towards the end of the race, there's still a lot that can happen between where they are now and Nome. So things have changed a lot in the past 24 hours, but I want to caution people, as we did last night as well, ironically, that this race is far from over. And, Yor and Nick and Mitch all have about 150 miles left. And the chase pack is only about 10 to 20 miles behind them. So there's still a lot that can happen between here and Nome.
Right. If I could just mention one thing to that, Alex, the last couple of years we've had very fast races, and I believe that they were finishing on Tuesday. So we will not have a finisher. If we do, it will be very early on Wednesday morning, but I don't think we're going to have a finisher here on Tuesday, which is kind of uncommon, at least for the last couple of years back, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's largely because we've had a lot more snow. The reports are that the snow has been heavier, so it hasn't been, quite as much of a superhighway as it's been in the past few years. But for me personally, I like when it's a little bit slower and more challenging. I feel that really brings out the best in the mushers. And so as a fan, I really like to see that.
Right. And one last thing for me, I read a very quick article just glancing. It was from Jake Berkowitz, who is a Iditarod finisher and has written for the ADN for the last couple of years. He had mentioned in his post that we're going to have a new champion this year in Iditarod, meaning it's probably going to be somebody other than a CV. And I think that his forecast is probably correct. We don't know, of course, but by the time we air our show tomorrow, we will have an Iditarod finisher and an Iditarod champion when we're on air. Anything else you want to mention on that before we go?
No, it's going to be really exciting. So if you are inclined to stay up all night watching the tracker, this would be a good night to do that.
Very good. All right, Alex, we will talk again tomorrow, and I want to thank all of our listeners who had commented in the last couple of days about where they could find our show when I was off air. It happens sometimes. Somebody has to fill in for us, and we're thankful that Michelle was able to do that on my off time. So, Alex, it's always a pleasure, and we'll talk again tomorrow, okay?
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our DogWorks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about DogWorks Radio. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
DogWorks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. DogWorks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dog Works at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.